After 3 months with the Alamo Scouts, um, I was to be sent somewhere else. I did not receive any written orders, so I wasn't sure. But eventually I found that I was going to be attached to the 35th Evac Hospital. So one night I was picked up by a small boat across the Philippine Sea to Cebu. Uh, Cebu eventually became a very big place, but at the time we were assigned, it was just another small island. Uh, my guide took me into the interior and then up a hill to where the uh, hospital was situated. And then I began to hear loud boom, 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 and an overhead swish, swish, swish. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "That's artillery from American Navy, and they are shelling the Japanese up in the hills. And then when that shelling quiets down, the Americans will go up into the hills and try to get rid of all the Japanese."
Is that what you were telling me about the caves? The Japanese in the caves?
Yes, they were in caves. They were very well protected because they had been there for a couple of years and they had made everything as foolproof as possible to keep the Americans from making any progress. So I found a cot and fell asleep. And in the morning, I went to headquarters of the 35th Evac Hospital and told the commander that I was reporting for duty. And he said, "What can you do?" And I said, "I could be a general practitioner. I can be a dermatologist. I can be most anything." He said, "We don't need dermatologists. You're an anesthetist. Go to the operating room, find an empty table, and we'll bring you patients." I said, "I don't know anything about giving anesthetics." He said, "There are 2 books, and you can read them while you're giving anesthetics. They're both by John Adriani, an international figure who was chief of anesthesia at Charity Hospital. One was the chemistry of anesthesia, what happens to the body's chemistry, and the other was physiology. So I found the books. They were sort of narrow and easy to read. And so I got a patient and got something to give as an anesthetic, and that was drip ether. We would tell the patients, breathe quietly while we would make kind of a cone with our hands and drop ether into that, and the patient would breathe it, and in a very short time, it was fast asleep. Surgeon could go to work. We operated on Japanese enemy. The he operated on Filipino surgeons, not surgeons, soldiers. And we operated on American soldiers who might have been injured. And I think I told you how I could tell who was under the operating room sheet without looking at the individual's face. And that was when the surgeon made an incision to get down to the abdominal contents to repair with a wound. If a worm came crawling out, that's from a civilian, because civilians were living their lifetime with worms.
The Filipino
Filipinos, yes.
civilians.
So I did that for a while. And then the anesthetist for the neurosurgeon, I think he's the one that he was playing softball while we were waiting to work and twisted his knee and ended up leaving us to go back to the United States to take care of his knee. So I became chief of anesthesia.
By reading 2 books, Anesthesia for Dummies, right?
Exactly. I was assigned to the neurosurgeon who was taking care of head wounds. He was not getting inside the skull. He was just cleaning up the wounds and stopping the bleeding and then patch things together. And then those patients who were injured, brain injury, either went to Australia for further care or back to the United States. Then one morning, I began giving anesthetics late in the afternoon, which is when our patients came in. And the surgeon or the neurosurgeon worked very slowly because it's very tedious work, stopping bleeding and patching up holes in the skull. And I stayed with him, and I would make sure the patient had enough anesthesia so that the surgeon could work with him. And both of us eventually left the operating room sometime around 4 o'clock in the morning. It was one of those times when I was leaving the operating room and was going up to take a shower and going to bed when I met a lieutenant colonel coming back down the stairs. Incidentally, we were in an abandoned school with several stores, not stores. Floors, thank you. And I was going upstairs, as I say, to get a shower in bed. When I met a lieutenant colonel, I remember that. I met him coming down the stairs, and he said to me, "Well, the son of a bitch is dead." I had no idea what he was talking about, so I said, "What do you mean, the son of a bitch is dead? Who are you talking about?" He said, "Franklin Roosevelt died this morning in Warm Springs, Georgia." I was lost for words. I can't imagine anybody thinking of Roosevelt as a son of a bitch. He saved us from depression. He saved us from getting into the war before we were ready. We sent arms to Russia. We sent arms to England. So he certainly was not a son of a bitch in my eyes or in my parents' eyes. They loved him dearly. I might add, although I was giving drop ether to patients whose abdomen was explored, I couldn't give ether to the neurosurgeon patients because they used an electrical spark to stop the bleeding of the skull and scalp. So I learned to pass a tracheal airway and connect it to an nitrous oxygen machine. Here I am talking about a machine giving an anesthetic. I'd never given it before. That's the advantage of working with good surgeons and having healthy young men as patients. They can tolerate most anything.
And being a smart man who can figure things out.
Well, yeah, thank you. One thing happened, I now remember. I was officer on call, and I think we were at a movie, and I was called. One of the enlisted men didn't look very good, so I called the other officer of the day. There were always two on call, and we went to see an enlisted man. He was sort of unconscious, and we checked his eyeballs, and he had wide
Pupils.
irises, widely up. I can't remember the term.
Dilated pupil.
Dilated pupils. Thank you. And it turned out that the other officer of the day was a neurologist, and he said it looks like he took methyl alcohol, thinking it was ethyl alcohol. Oh. He never recovered. He went back to the States as a body. From there, as the war began to wind down, we weren't seeing any more patients. We didn't have anything to do. Somebody said, let's go down to the port of Cebu. There are boats there. We could go for a boat ride. So we went down to the boat, and there was a large boat, one carved out of a huge tree. And I lay down on the boat and fell asleep. And the boat and the other passengers went around Cebu Island, and I woke up. We came back to port. And then one other thing that is interesting, if you remember your history, Magellan was a captain of a ship, and in those days, which goes way back, I guess, to the 1800s, 1700s, he would he would be captain of the ship and would name it for Queen Isabella. And Queen Isabella would give him money so that he could sail that ship and pay sailors and so on. And whatever ships from other countries he could capture, that would belong to Queen Isabella.
Right.
So I came upon, I was wandering down towards the port. I came across a plot of land, let's say 10 feet across, and it encircled with with iron railings, and it had a plaque on it which said, at this point, the Filipinos stopped the round the world ship that was Magellan was sailing, and Magellan was buried there. So the Filipinos stopped him.
Interesting. It
was a bit of history. I took pictures of that. Came back to the United States. Now, coming up to date, I asked one of the nurses who had dark skin and was obviously from the Far East. I said, where are you from? She said, I'm a Filipino. I said, I have pictures of the plot of land where Magellan is buried. She said, oh, I have pictures of myself. And she went home. Next day, came to work. She brought me a picture. She's leaning against this iron railing and giving me a big smile.
Cute.
Interesting.
How long were you in the Philippines? About?
Well, it was about at that point when I took a trip around Cebu, slept, and we began to close the hospital. I would say it was 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
And from there, we closed up the hospital and went to the next island, north, towards Japan, which is Luzon.
Right.
We're all packed up. And the next part was when I was playing volleyball, sprained my ankle. And,
it's very dangerous over there with the softball and volleyball injuries, right?
Dangerous. Someone said that the Alamo Scouts said volleyball is a contact sport. And then we waited at Luzon while the armistices were being signed. And then we got off Luzon and went into Tokyo.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay.
Beautiful.